Hi all, today we'll discuss about Java Spring Boot microservice related interview questions based on the freshers to experience level. So these all are the interview questions which I got from the Quora. So here the most repeated Spring Boot interview questions. This is the common interview questions which is asked most of the MNCs or any company. So what is a Spring Boot? Why should we use for the Spring Boot? The first question. Second is what all are the important features of using a Spring Boot. So some features is there while we use a Spring Boot. So what all are those? And the next question is what is auto configuration in a Spring Boot? How does it help? And why we called a Spring Boot opinionated? What is opinionated? The next question is a starter dependency. What is a starter dependency in a Spring Boot? How does it help? And the next question is what is the difference between a Spring Boot and enable auto configuration annotation? The next question is what is a Spring initializers? Why we use Spring initializer? And the next question is what is actuator? How we will use actuator? What all are the advantages and disadvantages of actuator? The next question is what is a Spring Boot CLI? What are the benefits of that? Next question is where do you define the property? So in a Spring Boot application we have a property enable. So where we are defining this property. Can we change the port? The next question is can we change the port of embedded Tomcat server in a Spring Boot? If yes, how we can change this? So it's a very important question. And the next question is what is the difference between a Spring and a Spring Boot? Next question is how can we set up a Spring Boot with Maven? Next question is how we will disable auto configuration. And the next question is how to register the custom auto configurations. A specific auto configurations, how we will disable a specific auto configurations. And the next question is how we will register custom auto configuration. The next question is how to tell auto configurations to backway when a pin exit. The next question is how does it mean that a Spring Boot support relaxed binding? What is relaxed binding? And what is dev tool? What do you mean by Spring dev tools? So these all are the questions which we have. And coming for the next one, so some of the cloud related questions also we have. And these all are also will be considered as Spring Boot interview questions. So how JWT integrated in a Spring Boot and how a Spring Boot communicate with JP. The next question is if I need authorization request before calling server services method in a Spring Boot, what will we do? And how JWT will work with multi-tenant environment. And the next question is what will happen if setter based and constructor based injections is applied in the same class. How do you execute a Tomcat related jar in a Spring Boot starter web? What is cyclic dependency? Next question is explain aware interface in bean lifecycle. What is bean lifecycle and aware interface? The next question is step to connect with more than one database in a Spring Boot. How we will connect the multiple database in a Spring Boot. So these all are this. And then we have some more others interview questions related for a Spring Boot. So this is auto configuration and bean registrations and bean management. And the next question is IOC and dependency injections. And the next question is execution context. What is execution context? And next question is controller advice and general exception management. And the next question is JPA and some data related project. So how we will integrate JPA and all. What is a Spring expression? A Spring expressions based on the security. And what is asynchronous communication configurations and all. The next question is thread pool and how we will use them, configure them. And then if you use job schedulers, then task schedulers, job schedulers, cron task in a Spring Boot. And the next question is object mapping and REST template configuration. And next question is filter and orders. Lots of Spring dependence on this filters, orders and all. The next question is configuration, precedence and alternative. And what is actuators? So these all are the commons. If you are going for this real-time experience with the Spring Boot related questions, so here are some of real-time 5 years of experience related Spring Boot questions. What all are the advantage of a Spring Boot? How we use a Spring Boot component? What is why we use a Spring Boot over a Spring? What is a starter dependency? How a Spring Boot work? What is a Spring Boot application annotation internally? What is component scan, and how does a Spring Boot application get started? What is a starter dependency? What is a Spring initializer? What is a Spring Boot CLI and what it is benefited? What all are the most common Spring Boot command line? And what all are the basic annotations that a Spring Boot offers? What is a Spring Boot dependency management? Can we create non-web applications in a Spring Boot? Is it possible to change the port of embedded Tomcat server? What all are the default port numbers in a Spring Boot Tomcat server? Can we override or replace embedded? Can we disable default web server in a Spring Boot? How we will disable a specific auto configuration class? Explain REST controllers in a Spring Boot. So how we can use? What is the difference between REST controller and controller annotations? What all are the HTTP requests through this Spring Boot? What is the difference between request mapping and get mapping? How to use user profile in a Spring Boot? What is actuators and advantage? How we will enable actuators? What are the provide actuator provide endpoint monitoring this? How we will get list of bins in the Spring Boot applications? How can check the environment property in a Spring Boot? How to enable debugging logs in a Spring Boot? What all are the defined properties in a Spring Boot? What is dependency injection? And what is IOC, inversion of control? So if you are looking for this Java Spring Boot related interview questions, so these all are the some interview important questions which is based on the freshers and experience level from the Spring Boot. So there are many others are there. If you go here, we have lots of Spring Boot related interview questions are there, but we can consider these all the same. What is the useful documentation of learning useful Spring Boot and all? So what all are the impacts and all? So we already discussed most of the common or important interview questions related for a Spring Boot. If you are going for this AOP and all, so this is the related for AOP Spring Boot, a Spring aspect oriented programming. What is AOP? What is aspect? What do you understand of aspect oriented programming? What is advice, point, cut, join, advice and all? So these all, if you are going for the MVCs related work, then you have MVC related questions will be there. So a Spring MVC will be considered here, and then data access layer. So see, these all are the annotation based some interview questions which we have already discussed. So these all are the commons. If you have prepared all those interview questions, then no other questions will be asked by the interviewer. So these all are the very most important interview questions which I have to prepare if you are going for the interview.